All week I've been craving a kind of movie I couldn't quite name. Something historic, maybe mythical, stories steeped in grandeur, conflict, and destiny. I dabbled in Shakespeare adaptations, Roman biopics, ancient battles, trying to satisfy a very specific hunger. Eventually, I found the word I'd been searching for. A word that's become unfashionable, diluted even over the last 2 decades. Epic. The term started losing weight in the early 2000s, and by the 2010s, well, it had been repackaged into a marketing buzzword. Around the time the housing market collapsed, Iron Man exploded into theaters. Coincidence? I think not. And a trend that would reshape cinema began. Sure, seasoned moviegoers might point out Spider-Man or X-Men to be the movies that laid the groundwork, and they'd be right. But it was RDJ as Tony Stark who redefined the blockbuster, bringing in a new era of epic storytelling. Large-scale battles, colossal stakes, superhumans clashing with gods and monsters. In some ways, comic book movies are our modern epics, but the origin of the word tells a different story. The Greeks coined epic to describe long poems, tales of heroic deeds passed down through generations. Stories like the Iliad, the Odyssey weren't just entertainment, they were cultural memory, morality plays, and spiritual myths. It's the original spirit I want to tap into today. Movies that blend historical grounding with mythic scale. Films about kings, conquerors, martyrs, generals, and gods. While samurai sagas, World War II, or Vietnam epics absolutely fit this description, today's focus is much more narrow than that. 18 films that echo the classical roots of the epic, full of tragedy, grandeur, and often blood. Let's begin with The Diamond Tier, 2 films I consider flawless masterpieces. Starting with numero uno, Lawrence of Arabia, 1962, directed by David Lean. Not just a war film, a mirage of identity, colonialism, and ego. David Lean's sweeping epic transforms the desert into a psychological landscape. Peter O'Toole's T.E. Lawrence is all contradictions. Imperial agent, self-styled god, lost boy. Maurice Jarre's score soars, but the silence hits just as hard when Lean pulls back and lets the sand speak. Here's some fun facts. Lean waited days just to capture the perfect cloud. This was filmmaking on a god-tier scale, shot with the patience of Bedouins and the ambition of empires. Also, this film, Lawrence of Arabia, is less a war story than a meditation on myth-making, how individuals are consumed by the personas history demands of them. You don't watch Lawrence of Arabia. You watch him dissolve. Number 2, Andrei Rublev, 1966, directed by Andrei Tarkovsky. This is more than a biopic. It's a spiritual epic carved into cinematic stone. Tarkovsky tells the story of a medieval Russian icon painter, but the film stretches far beyond one man's life. It's about the brutality of art, faith under fire, and the quiet resurrection of the soul. Horses drown, bells are cast, icons are painted, all with the aching grace of a dream. Fun fact, the final color sequence showing Rublev's surviving icons lands like a quiet miracle after 3 hours of black and white suffering. It's hope through pigment. Tarkovsky films time the way others film light. Andrei Rublev is less concerned with biography than the texture of spiritual survival, how art and suffering become undistinguishable. Next is the platinum tier, an ill-defined tier that is just below diamond, but still masterpiece. Number 3, Barry Lyndon, 1975, directed by, you guessed it, Stanley Kubrick. A satire painted in oil. Barry Lyndon is what happens when Kubrick takes 18th century Europe and shoots it like a Rembrandt portrait. The rise and fall of an Irish rogue becomes a slow-motion tragedy of pride, status, and futility, all captured through candlelight lenses and impossibly composed frames. Fun fact, Kubrick had NASA lenses modified to shoot scenes lit only by candlelight. Yes, that moody glow is quite real. Beneath the elegance is wrought. Every duel, parlor room, and ballroom is a chessboard. Kubrick doesn't show decadence, he embalms it. Next, Braveheart, 1995, directed by Mel Gibson. This isn't about historical accuracy, it's about legend. Mel Gibson channels Wallace as a full-throated scream against tyranny. Blood sprays like Shakespearean punctuation. Bagpipes swell like battle hymns. The myth of freedom becomes visceral, operatic, and undeniably cinematic. Fun fact, the face paint, the kilts, completely anachronistic, but it feels right. And that's the point. Braveheart isn't a documentary. It's a folk song set to steel and fury. Gibson crafts a myth that lives somewhere between the Iliad and a rebel anthem. Next up, The Northman, 2022, directed by Robert Eggers. An ancient blood oath soaked in psychedelic rage. The Northman is a revenge saga ripped straight from Norse legend, but Eggers laces it with shamanic weirdness and historical texture. Alexander Skarsgård becomes primal vengeance, howling through fire, mud, and prophecy. Fun fact, every ritual and ruin was historically vetted. Eggers consulted archaeologists to get Viking burial ships, berserker chants, and even animal entrails right. This isn't just Hamlet in the mud. It's a hallucinatory descent into the mythic masculinity. Eggers proves that epic cinema can be both authentic and otherworldly, and it's a movie that should be watched much more and appreciated by a larger audience. And finally, the gold tier, home to 13 films that are essential epics that echo the scope and spirit of antiquity. These, again, are a tier below the platinum tier, but are, quite frankly, great. First, Titus, 1999, directed by Julie Taymor. Julie Taymor adapted Shakespeare's most violent tragedy into an operatic fever dream. The film blends ancient Rome with fascist iconography, motorcycles, and chrome, turning Shakespeare's least respected play into a bold, surreal masterpiece. Anthony Hopkins delivers a terrifying performance, and Taymor's background in theater and opera makes every frame feel like a myth on the verge of madness. Few films are this fearless in style. Fun fact, Taymor had previously staged Titus Andronicus in New York. Her experience in avant-garde theater directly informed the film's radical look. Next up, The Green Knight, 2021, directed by David Lowery. A medieval fantasy that feels more like a parable than a quest. Dev Patel's Gawain isn't the chivalric hero we expect. He's insecure, searching, human. Lowery leans into dream logic with ghosts, giants, and talking foxes. It's not just about the journey. It's about morality, legacy, and the rot beneath the surface of knightly honor. Fun fact, The film was released by A24 and delayed by the pandemic, allowing Lowry to re-edit the film during lockdown. The extra time helped shape its mythic and elliptical tone. Next up, Medea, 1969, directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini. Pasolini cast opera singer Maria Callas in her only film role. And though she barely speaks, her presence is elemental. Medea is a collision of pagan ritual, betrayal, and vengeance. Pasolini frames Greek myth not as theater, but as anthropology, full of strange rites, alien landscapes, and brutal consequences. The film's dry, sun-blasted textures echo the collapse of ancient belief systems. Pasolini believed Christianity had banished myth from modern life. Medea was his protest, using myth as radical resistance. Next up is Iphigenia, 1977, directed by Mihalis Kakagiannis. The third film in Kakagiannis' Greek tragedy trilogy after Electra and The Trojan Woman. Iphigenia is a gut-wrenching exploration of sacrifice. Set just before the Trojan War, it turns a myth into a political drama, one where the gods never appear, but their demands echo in every moral compromise. Irene Pappas, as Clytemnestra, gives one of the most emotionally raw performances in any Greek tragedy on film. Fun fact, the film was Greece's submission to the Oscars and won several major awards in Europe, but is still criminally underseen. Now we have Macbeth, 2015, directed by Justin Kurzel. This is Shakespeare filtered through the grimy lens of Apocalypse Now. Kurzel's Macbeth doesn't just dramatize ambition, it ritualizes it. Michael Fassbender gives a haunted, PTSD-riddled performance, turning Macbeth into a man unraveling under the weight of grief, prophecy, and blood. Marion Cotillard's Lady Macbeth is hypnotic, less conniving, more existentially hollowed. The film's true weapons, though, is its imagery. Scotland becomes a blood-soaked wasteland of fog, flame, and ashes. Fun fact, the film was shot on location in the Scottish Highlands using mostly natural light. The orange glow of the final battle isn't CGI, it's actually wildfire smoke. Kurzel draws from real historical trauma. The Macbeths are presented like war veterans emotionally paralyzed by the brutality they've lived through. It's a Macbeth that swaps poetry for pain and theatricality for mud and madness. Next, The Last Temptation of Christ, 1988, by Marty Scorsese. Forget the controversy. This is one of the most spiritually sincere epics ever made. Willem Dafoe plays Jesus not as a divine icon, but as a tormented man wrestling with fear, desire, and destiny. Scorsese and screenwriter Paul Schrader reframe Christ's life as an existential drama. The titular temptation isn't sex, it's a quiet life. The human vulnerability makes the ultimate sacrifice even more powerful. Fun fact, Peter Gabriel composed the score, blending Middle Eastern instruments with ambient sound years before it was trendy. Next up, Oedipus Rex, 1967, Pier Paolo Pasolini. Pasolini again, this time diving into Freud's favorite myth. He uses autobiographical imagery. The film begins in 20th century Italy to collapse time, showing how Oedipus's story is everyone's story. The sandblasted landscapes, ritual masks, and anti-theatrical acting make it feel like an ancient relic pulled from a dream. It's a tragedy as cosmic fate. Pasolini saw Oedipus not just as myth, but as Marx's parable about ignorance, self-destruction, and cycles of violence. Next up, Gladiator 2000, director Ridley Scott. The film that revived the sword and sandal genre. Joaquin Phoenix's Commodus is pure Shakespearean villainy. Russell Crowe's Maximus is mythic stoicism. But beyond revenge, the film taps into a yearning for lost virtue. Rome as both empire and metaphor. It gave us the modern, gritty, historical epic and won Best Picture at the Oscars. Fun fact, Oliver Reed died during production. His scenes were completed using CGI, one of the earliest major uses of digital facial effects in a drama. Up next, Spartacus 1960, director Stanley Kubrick. Kirk Douglas hired Kubrick, not knowing he'd later regret it. The young director clashed with cast and studio. Still, the film thrives on contradiction. It's a leftist epic written by blacklisted screenwriter Dalton Trumbo, yet financed by Hollywood bigwigs. Every I Am Spartacus is a coded political statement. It's less about Rome and more about resistance. Fun fact, Douglas's decision to credit Trumbo helped break that aforementioned Hollywood blacklist. 15. Alexander Nevsky, 1938, director Sergei Eisenstein. An epic with 1 foot in propaganda and 1 foot in visual poetry. Commissioned to stir anti-German sentiment in the USSR, the film's battle on the ice scene became one of the most influential war sequences in cinema. Sergei Prokofyev's bombastic score elevates it to legend. Watch it for the music, the editing, and the nationalistic myth-making. Fun fact, George Lucas cited the battle scenes as an influence for the Empire Strikes Back's Hoth scene. Next up, Apocalypto, 2006, directed by Mel Gibson. Say what you will about Gibson. As a director, he knows how to create pulse-pounding spectacle. This Mayan language chase film is pure adrenaline, filmed with shocking clarity and intensity, but underneath the violence lies a surprisingly nuanced portrait of a collapsing civilization. Gibson avoids white savior tropes and makes the story deeply immersive. Fun fact, this film was shot entirely on digital using Panavision Genesis cameras, at the time a cutting-edge choice that gave the film its hyper-real crispness. Second to last, we have Kingdom of Heaven, Director's Cut, 2005, directed by Ridley Scott. The theatrical cut was butchered, but the director's cut adds 45 minutes of character, politics, and nuance. Orlando Bloom's Balian transforms from mopey to morally driven. Ava Green's Queen becomes tragic, not hollow. It's a story about religious hypocrisy, chivalry under fire, and what Jerusalem means as an idea. Scott's restored version is often cited as one of the greatest directorial cuts ever, completely altering how the film is perceived. And last but not least, Beckett, 1964, directed by Peter Glenville. Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole duel with words, theology, and power. Burton's Thomas Becket is the king's drinking buddy turned righteous thorn. O'Toole's Henry II, a spoiled monarch torn between love and fury. The film turns political betrayal into spiritual warfare, exploring what happens when loyalty to a king collides with loyalty to God. Fun fact, This film was nominated for 12 Oscars and helped reignite mainstream interest in medieval stories before The Lion in the Winter and A Man for All Seasons followed. I greatly appreciate you joining me on this journey, and I hope you check out these films and let me know your thoughts down below. Also, let me know ones you feel as though I missed, because if I haven't seen them, I'm going to want to check them out. You all are the best and make this possible. Be sure to subscribe to see what's coming next down the road, and I will catch you on the flippity floop. Bye, y'all.